glamping, glamorous camping.
Is it true that an investment of less than $10,000 can bring you in $1, $2, or even $5,000 per month in profit?
Is it true that you can turn land like this into a cash flowing machine that could potentially replace your 9-to-5 income? In this video, we're going to break down actually how much it costs to start a successful glamping site and ultimately how much you're gonna walk away each month in profit, assuming everything goes well. There's many different types of glamping sites out there. You have things as nice as luxury A-frames or geodomes, all the way down to more primitive sites like luxury tents. Each of these different glamping sites come with varying costs associated with them. Obviously, you have to purchase the A-frame, the geodome, or the tent, but there's other hidden costs associated with each that can really add up. So in this video, we're gonna break down some of the estimated costs and what I think it will ultimately take to set up a cash flowing machine as a glamping site. One of the ones that I would be most interested in, or at least intrigues me the most, is the geodome. Something that sells really well on Airbnb in the past, present, and I know will in the future as well, is selling on the experience. You know, what does everybody want when they go out and travel? Is they want something they don't get at home every day. The geodome photographs really well. You can picture yourself laying under the stars. But the only thing that comes to mind for me is if it's a primitive site, what do you do with all the poop? First and foremost, location, location, location. It's not that different than a normal rental and where location is going to be critical. Not just the location, but the setting. That's gonna be the most important thing for any glamping setup, because just as much as people want to rent a geodome, they may not want to rent one in somebody's backyard necessarily in the city. So the setting has to be just as important as the location itself. When selecting a location for a glamping site of any kind, you want to be near 3 things. Number 1, you want to be near a town. It doesn't have to be 2 minutes from the town, but probably something within a 20 or 30-minute drive max. Number 2, you're gonna wanna be in a location where there's local activities or attractions nearby, such as a state or national park. Most people that are into glamping are probably also going to be into the outdoors and things like hiking. The third thing you're gonna want is some type of view or amenity that's right in the backyard of your campsite. So this can be a pond, a lake, maybe you can walk right into a hiking trail. Whatever it may be, you need those 3 items in order to be a successful glamping site. But let's hold on a minute here. The land itself is likely going to cost far more than the actual geodome or tent or whatever it is that you buy. Even a smaller plot of land can cost you tens of thousands of dollars to buy. If I were going to set up a glamping site, I would buy something big enough to where I could set up multiple glamping sites in the same plot. The reason this is important is because the overall cost for each glamping site goes down with the more that you have. At a minimum, I would expect to spend around $20,000 to buy a piece of land that was worthy of putting some glamping sites in. Once you have the land, you're also going to have to decide if you're going to pay for utilities to get out there and things like a septic system. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the next big cost is ultimately going to be the structure itself. So in this example, we're going to talk about a geodome and luxury geodome at that. These can cost as little as $5,000 and as high as $30,000. But that's not the only cost associated with them. That is literally just the material and the shell of the building. You also have to factor in the cost of shipping, and the bigger the unit, the more it's going to cost to ship. Also, depending where you're sourcing it from, it may be more expensive to get to the location that your land is in. And hold on just a minute, because the geodome is not just some tent that you're taking out of the back of your vehicle and throwing on a piece of ground or land or whatever. You need to consider the costs associated with building a proper deck or structure to have the geodome sit upon. And decks, my friends, are not cheap. Especially with the cost of lumber and supplies and contractor work, you're likely looking at a minimum investment, a bare minimum of $10,000. But decks, depending on the slope of the hill and the materials and the size, can go all the way up to $80,000 to $100,000 on the high end. In this specific example, let's assume you bought a $10,000 geodome, so nothing crazy. but we're going to spend $40,000 building a deck that we can also put a hot tub on and maybe a pergola. Speaking of a hot tub, I want to budget for that too, because ultimately if I want to be able to rent out at the daily rate and the occupancy that's going to yield me the highest profit, you need a hot tub at one of these sites. An average hot tub's probably gonna run you around $8,000 to $10,000 for a hot tub plus the electrical work and the electrician bill. The thing you also have to think about that a lot of people don't is not just the site itself, but how are people gonna get to the site? Is it already cleared out? Do you need to pay somebody to clear a road, put some gravel down, pave it? You have to think about these costs. In addition to that, I mentioned before septic and utilities. Especially if you're going to have a glamorous camping site, you're probably gonna wanna have a toilet and a shower, but those things, unless you're gonna do a compost toilet, which I highly recommend not doing, because then you're gonna have to either hire a cleaner or do it yourself to clean up poop and pee and then refill the toilet with peat moss or whatever, you're going to need a septic system. And that is where the sewage basically leaks out into the field through leach lines. And those, my friends, are not cheap. A typical septic system and other utilities and clearing the land for that is probably going to cost you anywhere from a minimum of $10,000 to a higher end of $40,000. And if you guys want to have multiple glamping sites or multiple geodomes for that matter on the single site, it's going to cost you a little bit more money to do so. Well, once you have the dome set up on the piece of land with your deck and the hot tub and everything, what's going to go in the dome? You have to account for those expenses as well, because you don't just purchase the dome and let somebody come in and lay on the floor. If you're going to do something a little bit more luxurious, you may want to even hire a contractor to build out some walls, but then you're going to have to pay for drywall, more electric work. Another thing to consider is HVAC. Are you going to put something like a mini split in there for heating and cooling, or are you going to have it be more primitive? If you're in a location where you have extreme heat or extreme cold, you're probably going to want to consider HVAC. That's going to run you around $10,000 probably to put in. Obviously, it depends on the size of the unit. If you are going to pay somebody to put in drywall and create walls in different spaces, that's also going to be very expensive. But in this case, let's assume you don't do that. We just need to furnish it. So we are going to pay for HVAC because I think that's important for good reviews. And then secondly, furniture is probably going to run you $5,000 on the low end and then $10,000 on the high end. Let's say we're right in the middle there at about $7,500. One thing we did not touch on yet, my friends, is permitting. There's all sorts of permitting, from septic permit, getting you set up with utilities. Also need to think about short-term rental permits if we need one for that local area or municipality. So you need to look online or work with the GC and figure out what these costs are going to be, likely a few $1,000s. Also, depending on the size of the geodome or structure you're setting up and the location that you're in, you may have to pay for a permit as well. So you need to look into that, and if you want to avoid doing that, you need to stay within a certain size footprint of that geodome. So those are all our costs, and the total is right here. Now, with that being said, is this a good investment? Well, how do you know? We need to look at what our return on investment is. So as a real estate investor, specifically into short-term rental properties, which is what a glamping site ultimately would be, I seek a minimum of a 20 to 25% cash-on-cash return. All right, so I got my handy-dandy calculator out here, and we're going to estimate the total revenue that I think this luxury geodome would be able to generate each year. In order to do that, we have to take the average daily rate and multiply it by our occupancy rate. Assuming we're about an 80% occupancy rate, I found to be average around most geodomes, that would be 292 nights per year that you're rented. And I found that we would be able to rent this specific type of geodome out, assuming we have a hot tub and the pergola that I mentioned before, for about $300 per night, which is incredible considering that would be renting for far more than a tiny home of that, size in most locations. So if we multiply 292 by 300 a night, it would come out to $87,600 in revenue per year. Now that's not all profit. You have to pay your cleaners, you have to pay maintenance costs, and any other costs that pop up over the course of time to operate the property. So what I found, at least with my properties, the cash flow or profit margin is right around 40 to 45% in most cases. Now with the geodome, I expect it to be a little bit higher because I expect the cost to be a little bit less than operating a bigger property. So I would expect to profit about 50% of that. So 50% of that is $43,800. Now, if the total cost to set up this geodome, purchase the land, and all of that, we were all in for 120, you would just take this number and divide it by 120,000, and that means our cash on cash return, we multiply that by 100, would be 36.5%. So that'd be right in the range between the lower end I would want of 20% cash on cash and what I would want on the higher end for a luxury geodome site of 50%. So is it worth the investment? It probably would be, especially considering this would be an all cash purchase. This would be even higher if we're able to leverage debt through a personal loan or some company that would be able to lend us based on a glamping site. So I think it's probably worthwhile your investment. You're not going to get the other benefits I mentioned earlier, but purely a cash flow play, this is going to be unmatched for a piece of real estate that you're going to be able to buy for $120,000 all in. One other thing to mention that I brought up earlier is that I would purchase a piece of land that had the capability of adding more than just one glamping site. Because if you're able to add 5 geodomes, obviously you need more capital to do this. However, all the other costs like the land and the permitting is now going to be pooled between 5 properties instead of 1. Meaning your cost per glamping site actually goes down, and that means your cash on cash return per property will go up. So if you're able to do that, then it would definitely likely be worth your investment. And if you want to learn more about short-term rentals and how to be really profitable on Airbnb, give my page a follow.